Well, just when we thought the Mariners might be done, here comes another trade not even 24 hours after the Jorge Polanco acquisition. Now, this one is not as noteworthy, but it does bring in a fun player and utility man, Samad Taylor from the Royals. We'll tell you about him coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, that's LOCKDON, to get yourself started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. So, Jerry Dipoto was on the radio this morning and made it sound like the Mariners were pretty much done with the way that he was wording things. But then, like an hour after he hopped off of there, here comes another trade. Mark Feinsand reported that the Royals were trying to make room on their 40-man roster for, funny enough, Adam Frazier, of all people. And they were close to making a minor trade with the Mariners to accomplish that. And so my immediate thought was reliever, right? Because that's what the Mariners do. And the Royals have a ton of relief arms on their 40-man roster, so that seemed like the most likely fit there. But then Colby texted me Samad Taylor, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe, because Colby has talked a lot about Samad Taylor over the last few months, and lo and behold, it's Samad Taylor, utility man. He can play some infield, he can play some outfield. He's really fascinating, and the Mariners get him for the cost of a player to be named later or cash considerations, and I would assume most likely cash considerations. So again, Colby, you have talked about Taylor quite a bit. He's been on your radar. What do you think now that he's a Mariner?
Well, I always knew it was inevitable because much like Thanos, my information always comes through. So
that's what having sources is like. Real sources.
Real sources.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So not all that surprised. Like I said, like I have said, I've been hearing about
this might not be the first time we recorded this segment.
This exact segment. Yeah. So I've known about the Mariners' interest in Samad Taylor since November. Like, it's been an ongoing thing this winter. And so yeah, when you see the tweet that the Mariners and the Royals are about to make a minor deal, you put together that that they had interest in Samad Taylor in the past. They have an open 40-man spot, and Taylor still makes a tremendous amount of sense. It's pretty easy to piece together. So yep. Don't let that fool you, though. I did absolutely call this. So yay me.
Right, you broke the nose. Cloud chaser himself.
Sure. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Taylor, fun player, like you said. He is. Some people seem to be confused by the fit, which I don't really understand, since he's almost certainly starting the year in AAA. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just the player that the player that the Mariners are getting is a pretty fun player, and there are some similarities to other guys who have made some pretty serious impacts to the Mariners the last few years. So it'll be interesting to talk about him and kind of dive into why the Mariners are so interested, or why they had been so interested in Samad Taylor.
So let's talk about Taylor a little bit more, give you some background on him. He was a former 10th round pick of the Cleveland Guardians back in 2016. Not sure how he made his way over to the Blue Jays, but was with the Blue Jays and was traded from the Blue Jays to the Royals in the Whit Merrifield deal. So not only do we have Adam Frazier connections on today's show, but also Whit Merrifield connections, just checking all the boxes on today's episode. And he has produced at the minor league level quite a bit, pretty much at every level of the minors. He has hit 141 WRC plus down in Double-A back in 2021. 128 WRC plus in AAA this past year. He only has 69 major league plate appearances to his name so far. They have not gone well. Just 49 WRC plus during that span. But the big thing here is, one, the versatility defensively. Like I said, he can play some second, he can play some third, he can play all the outfield spots. And that's because or at least partly because he's got wheels. He's an incredibly athletic dude, 91st percentile in sprint speed this past year. What do you like about Samad Taylor?
Taylor is an interesting guy. Like you said, 25 years old. He has 2 option years left. So he fits nicely down in AAA. Very small sample size in the big leagues. Interestingly enough, in just 69 plate appearances, he still managed to steal 8 bags. Which speaks to his speed and his base running prowess. So 51 total stolen bases last year between the 2 levels. So this is a guy who can swipe a bag for you. He is a really good athlete. He can play all over the field. He plays a legitimate second base. He can handle left field and he can handle center field if you really need him to. Certainly athletic enough to do that. When you look at, what he brings to the plate, not a ton of punch, although there is a caveat to that we'll get to in a minute. And he is a guy who walks. He walks quite a bit. He's had a 10% walk rate or higher every year since 2018. The swing and miss was an issue earlier in his minor league career. In 2019, it was at 28%. At 2021, it was at 29%. But at AAA, that's been slashed down to 22% and then 20%. So, for a guy like Taylor and his profile, he has to make contact pretty consistently to be valuable. So if he's going to, run a 30% strikeout rate like he did this last year in the majors, that could be an issue. And it probably is what's going to stop him from being anywhere close to an everyday player. But again, he walks a lot. It is elite speed. He is a very good base runner, getting better at stealing bases as he matures. And fun little note here. He did hit 301, 418, 468 in AAA last year. That's a 128 WRC plus. But here's kind of the fun, sneaky value play of Samad Taylor, is that he slashed 427, 510, 683 against left-handed pitching in AAA last year. So 618 slug for a guy who doesn't really have any power. I mean, that's a lot of doubles and triples, but still, that is some legitimate pop against left-handed pitching. So we have a guy who can play multiple positions. He can steal bases. He can, just flat out run. He can fly, and he crushes left-handed pitching. Why would the Mariners want a player like this? I don't know. Have the Mariners rostered Sam Haggerty for the last 5 years? Did the Mariners get really good value out of Jose Caballero last year? Did they not sign Dylan Moore to a massive extension a few years ago? Like
massive extension.
Yeah. 3 years, $8 million. Massive, yeah. But yeah, so why would the Mariners like Samad Taylor? Because he's Dylan Moore, because he's Sam Haggerty, because he's Jose Caballero.
He's another guy to throw in the mix. And you need guys like that. If you can add more depth, like actual quality depth like that, do it. And the Mariners at times have not done that. And I've talked in the past about get too much. It's okay to get like a little too much. And sometimes it just looks like this, right? Where it's not giving $8 million to a free agent that you don't really need. It's just add some interesting talent to the back end of your roster. You don't have to just make the rest of your 40-man roster just complete utter BS, right? Like you can add some legit talent there, and the Mariners are doing that here. My favorite thing about this trade is that they took advantage of another team's 40-man roster crunch, which they haven't done a lot. They've done that twice this year, though, with Blake Hunt first and now Samad Taylor. And they get a player who I don't think should have been the guy that was cut out of all the options that the Royals had to make room for Frazier on their roster. I know Taylor might not have had a clear path to the bigs because of the presence of guys like Frazier, but still, that's a lot of talent to just give up on after 69 plate appearances again at the major league level. So I like the upside here. I like the upside play. I think the Mariners can get something out of Taylor. I think this is a legitimate ad, and it's a really fun ad. And so we're going to talk more about how he kind of fits into the whole mix there at the back end of the 26-man roster, and potentially in terms of a camp battle with someone like Dylan Moore, Sam Haggerty, Ryan Bliss, etc. in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Factor Meals. We're at the point of the year where New Year's resolutions are often ditched and left to be forgotten. But that doesn't have to be the case anymore with Factor Meals. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery service takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and delicious options to kickstart your resolutions. Factor has everything I need for a week of good eating. In addition to ready-to-eat meals, they also have cold-pressed juices, smoothies, energy bites, extra protein, veggie sides, and more to keep me energized. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 and use the promo code LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off. Once again, that's 50% off at factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 with the promo code LockedOnMLB50. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen after the Samad Taylor trade. And as a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So before we get back into Samad Taylor and how he kind of fits here in Seattle, just wanted to mention, so we recorded Mailbag Monday yesterday. And of course, because, we were trying to push it off as much as we could, because we knew that there was
something was happening.
Yeah, right.
Some of you owe us an apology.
Right.
Mostly Ty. Yeah, mostly Ty.
Yeah. So we're gonna use some of the stuff that we recorded last night, and I think we're gonna answer a couple of additional questions from our Google form. If you do have a question that you want to sneak in here at the buzzer, Google form is down in the description of this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your preferred podcast platform. So get those in as soon as possible, because we are going to record I think just one segment tomorrow and then just kind of splice it all together. Anyway, Samad Taylor. I've been asked quite a bit on Twitter over the last 40-ish minutes or so, however long it's been since the Taylor trade became official. How does he fit? Right? Does this mean Dylan Moore is getting traded? Does this mean Sam Haggerty is done in Seattle? Does this mean they don't really believe in Ryan Bliss? Anything like that? The answer is probably no to all of those things. The answer is probably that's a massive overreaction to this acquisition. Taylor has 2 minor league options left.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to force it. I think that you'll bring him into camp. You'll let him compete with Demo and Haggerty and Bliss for that last roster spot. And if he doesn't make it, if he doesn't, force your hand essentially, then okay, cool. Start him out in AAA. No big deal. You don't have to force it with him. So there really isn't any sort of headache here that Taylor creates. So do you feel otherwise? How do you feel Taylor is going to fit here in Seattle?
Yeah, he's going to fit nicely in Tacoma. Unless there's a spring injury. I think based on what we know about the roster right now is unless the Mariners are willing to go to a 7-man bullpen, which they've never been willing to do. But if they do, then maybe there's an extra bench spot open, and that may make some sense because Seattle has a bunch of guys who they have to manage their workload, right? They have Garver, they have Haniger. They have to manage those guys' workload, and maybe to a certain extent Jorge Polanco, although yesterday, Hollander said they feel really good about his health. So it doesn't seem like they think of him as a injury-prone guy. But you do have a couple of guys. So maybe you want that extra bench spot, at which point this becomes a lot more interesting of a conversation. But assuming they do a 13-13 split like they traditionally do, Dylan Moore is going to be the 26th guy unless they trade him, which They could. This trade could allow them to do that. But he's going to be the 26th guy. So I don't think Taylor has much of a shot at all, barring some kind of injury, to make this club. But that's certainly possible. And like you said, he has 2 options left. Sam Haggerty has an option left. I think Haggerty's probably still ahead of Taylor in the Mariners' mind, but that could change. Bliss isn't even on the 40 man, and he doesn't have to be added until after this year. So he really has to force the Mariners' hand because they have no incentive to add him really anytime soon. So Bliss has to perform and pretty well if he wants to get a shot. So I think he fits well because like he pushes Bliss down a little bit, makes him a little less important. He also gives you viable options as kind of a platoon outfielder if that's a direction you want to go. And it's not just the Bliss and Haggerty and more guys that he's competing with. It's also Cade Marlowe and Zach DeLoach and Taylor Trammell. So there's a lot of competition for what is honestly probably the 27th spot. Again, unless the Mariners roll with a 7-man bullpen, which I think, or unless they decide that they want to roll with Mitch Garver as the backup catcher for a little while until they feel like Blake Hunt is necessary. Now, that's a pretty big risk, and I don't feel like that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to carry
that's going to be a no from me, dog.
Yeah, I think they're going to carry Zavala. Like I'm pretty confident Zavala is going to make this team. But if they choose not to, that is a way they could open up another bench spot, or they can go with a 7-man bullpen. And if they do either of those, and there is an extra bench spot, then I think Taylor has a shot at that. But my gut is that extra spot would go to Marlowe or Trammell before it would go to Haggerty or Taylor. That would just be my guess.
I feel like if there is a 5th bench spot, that's going to go to someone that can play all 3 outfield spots. Samad Taylor can do that. Marlowe can do that. Haggerty can do that.
If Taylor Trammell can do it, Haggerty can do it. Yeah.
Have we seen Sam Haggerty play center field?
I can't remember. I think a couple times. Okay. Yeah. And we've seen Dylan Moore do it.
At Arizona.
Let's hope we never have to again.
Had to see him do it in Arizona.
Yeah, but that's kind of the one thing missing right now from this bench is like, who's the guy who you can give Julio a day off and you feel like, well, at least we're not losing anything defensively or very little defensively. Not on this roster. So
yeah,
like Wade Taylor's still out there, just saying. But yeah, I think unless they're going with a bigger bench than they have in the past, or unless they're going to risk Garver as their backup catcher for a couple months, I just don't see any way Taylor is going to make this roster, barring injuries, which is certainly possible. But honestly, it might take a couple injuries because like if Moore moves into the role that's vacated, then I think Haggerty's still ahead of Taylor, but maybe not. We'll see how they deploy them. But
and then of course he's also going to be kind of in a season long competition with someone like Ryan Bliss for opportunities. Like if an injury does crop up, like who do you go to, right? If you're the Mariners, do you go with the guy that's on your 40-man roster already in Taylor, or do you add Bliss to the 40-man because you think he's ready to contribute?
Right.
So I kind of feel like Taylor also simultaneously has to hold Ryan Bliss off to maintain his opportunities at the major league level as well.
Right. I mean, again, all that's really happened here the last 24 hours is that the Mariners have kind of pushed Haggerty, Bliss, not really more, but like Haggerty, Bliss, maybe even Locklear. They've kind of pushed down like the immediacy of when we might need them. Like a lot of people thought that Bliss was going to be needed, in May, and he was going to just platoon with Rojas. Like a lot of people thought for most of the year that most of this offseason that Bliss was going to make the team and just be the platoon with Rojas. Now that's irrelevant. Like Rojas is part of a platoon, and that's with Urias. So, and by the way, it is worth mentioning, just throwing this out there, Rojas and Urias also both do have an option left, and I believe neither of them has reached the 5 years of service time left to be able to decline that option. I think they're both at 4. So technically, if needed, Urias or Rojas could be sent down, as well. And also, we shouldn't rule out the possibility that maybe Rojas is traded between now and opening day. Like if maybe they like what they see from Bliss or Taylor or whatever, and Rojas, they can go get a reliever they want, or they can go get an outfielder, like the Josh Rojas of outfielders, and maybe they do that. So the Mariners essentially today, they add more versatility and they add more options to how they want to build out the rest of their roster pretty much throughout the entire year. So, I think Taylor has a very small shot at making the opening day roster, but I do expect that he will at some point get a call up to the Mariners this year. And if not, then essentially what the Mariners have done is they've bought 2025 Sam Haggerty, because Haggerty is going to start making a little bit of money after this year, and he's going to be out of options.
So I actually have a question for you about Rojas, but I'm going to ask you that in just a moment. First, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I'm sure a lot of us Seahawks fans are going to be hate watching the 49ers and cheering on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, but the only thing I would love more than seeing the 49ers go home crying is winning some cold, hard cash on FanDuel. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W, or 2, or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers can join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen after the Samad Taylor trade. So, Colby, I got a question for you. Does it feel like the Mariners have put Josh Rojas in a position where he could be their Marwin Gonzalez?
Yes, but it could also just as easily be Urias. Like they could have two. I would assume that Urias would be their preference to be the everyday third baseman, right? To get a majority of the play time at third base.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they're going to be bullheaded about it. And if Rojas is just better, and I think there's a chance he could be, then I think they just roll with Rojas, and Urias is like both of those guys, assuming they're both on the 26 man on opening day, they're going to get a lot of play time. Like it just, you're going to want to give Polanco days off. You're going to want to give Urias a day off. You're going to want to give JP a day off. And the inclusion of Urias and Dylan Moore on this roster gives you 2 shortstop options to give JP a day off if needed. So I think Rojas, I don't know if they trust him in the outfield. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Rojas get some innings in left field during spring training.
He's played some corner outfield, right?
He's played a little bit, yeah. So I think that's what they would like. I think in their like perfect world, Rojas gets like 350 plate appearances, playing second, short, and third as needed, and a little bit of corner outfield. And Urias is so good that he kind of commands like 500 plate appearances as the third baseman. I think that's what they want. If Urias can't give it to them, then I think they'll pivot to Rojas pretty quick, and they'll just essentially swap roles.
Right. Because when I say Marwin Gonzalez, I'm talking about a player that's still basically an everyday player, but he's not tied to a particular position. But you're going to see him in the lineup 5 times a week still.
Yeah, I could see that, although I don't think Rojas is going to get much play time at short. I think he's clearly behind Urias and more if the Mariners need to give JP a breather. I think Rojas can fill that role. It's a role he's, was very successful in Arizona. Now he played a little bit more than Marwin ever did down in Arizona. But yeah, again, we talked about this a lot with like Luke Raley and a lot with, other guys. Like if you can pick and choose their matchups a little bit, put them in positions where they're more likely to succeed, then their numbers in theory do go up. And even though you get less bulk from that player, you get more impact, more immediate impact from that player. So yeah, I do think Rojas could be that guy. I think that the Urias and Moore being able to play shortstop is huge for them because it does, JP shouldn't play 155, 160 games a year.
Yeah.
Like he shouldn't. Yeah. Like we know he should. Nobody should. So I think, I think they're going to use Rojas, particularly early. I'd be shocked if we saw, if we got through the month of April and JP had played every single game, if Polanco had played every single game, if Urias had played every single, like, I'd be pretty shocked by that. If Haniger and Garver, even if they were just pure DHs, I'd be shocked if they played in 80% of the games early on. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for Rojas to get at bats. I think it'll be at 3 or 4 different positions. And I think the Mariners are just going to kind of mix and match, try and find something that works really well for them in March and April. And then in May, we'll start to see them really start to like crystallize, what the plan is. And we'll have a good idea of who's going to be in the lineup based on the pitching matchup on a day-to-day basis.
So lastly, we've gotten a bit more clarity, it would seem. It's not confirmed, but it's being reported by The Athletic about the money changing hands on the Polanco deal. I initially thought it was only going to be about $500,000 to offset the difference between Desclafani's contract and Polanco's. I didn't also factor in that Justin Topa was making a little bit of money as well. But The Athletic is reporting that it's actually around $8 million going to Minnesota, which would, I would say, significantly impact what we thought the Mariners had still, because it's the money that they have in theory is so finite. So does that change how you think they'll approach the remainder of the offseason and the build up to opening day? Do you think it should change? And if not, or if you still would like to see them spend some money, where would you like to spend that money? And when would you like to see them spend that money? Do you think they should wait a little bit into spring training and then, maybe an injury crops up or something and then they can address things that way? Or how do you think they should go about this?
Go get the best player you can as soon as you can.
And who do you think that is?
Who do I think the best player they can get is?
Or should get?
Assuming that, like, there's some gray area here in the 8 million. A, we don't know if it's exactly 8 million.
Right.
B, we don't know like exactly what the offset is from the money the Giants sent to the Mariners for the Desclafani trade. And I've seen people say it's actually like 6.5 million of added payroll. In my head, I was thinking, Desclafani is his salary is basically paid for, blah, blah, blah. And him and Topa, the difference between those two and Polanco this year was like 3.5 million. So I thought they added 4.5 million to their payroll. It's a little bit nebulous and couple $1,000,000 here or there in the grand scheme of things, not that big for Jerry DiPoto and what he's working with. It's pretty important. So if we assume they have, let's say, if they want to keep some money in reserve for the deadline, and if we assume that this number is fairly accurate, like let's just say they have $10 million left that they would feel comfortable spending before they were really right up against it and would have to make additional moves in order to make moves at the deadline. So let's say they have 10 million left. The best player they could get for $10 million, I mean, they could definitely get Maton, but it really does sound like they want to stay in-house with their bullpen options. So I'm thinking, could they get like Michael Lorenzen for $10 million and put him into 5 and put Brian Wu in the minors, so you can kind of control his workload that way? I think that's an interesting idea. Could they go get Tommy Pham or Adam Duvall, kind of a right-handed complement to the outfield and bring some power, some right-handed power and quality at bats? Could they go get Michael A. Taylor to bring some center field defense, like legitimate center? If I could get Taylor for less than $10 million, that's probably the guy that I would go get. But I do think
I feel like you can get any of the guys that you just mentioned for less than 10.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe there's a buyout, but like Jock Peterson got like 9.5, but there's a buyout, so it's 12 guaranteed. But because of the buyout, it's only 9 million for this year, which is Jerry and Justin did this with Garver with the buyout. There is that it's less of a hit this year because there's a buyout down the road. So if I got to pick, like, you're not getting Bellinger or Snell or Montgomery with $10 million, not happening. So assuming they also don't clear any payroll, like they don't trade Ty France or something like that, or whatever, like if we're just sticking at 10 million, I think my number one target at this stage would be Michael A. Taylor. But I think Lorenzen's right there. I really think Lorenzen is really interesting because I do like the idea of keeping Wu in the minors and kind of controlling his innings there. So And Lorenzen, I think, is probably the best starting pitcher left, not the Snell, Montgomery, like that type of guy. So Lorenzen's probably the guy. If they're going pitching, if they want offense, I would prioritize Michael A. Taylor and then maybe Tommy Pham. But I still, and it doesn't sound like they're interested in doing this at all, but for me, getting like Junis and like Fujinami in that bullpen is something that I would really like to see them do. And, maybe we're getting to the point now where maybe Fujinami just takes a minor league deal. I mean, I doubt it, but maybe. Junis probably not, but
no.
I would still like to see them go in the bullpen. Doesn't sound like they want to do that, which is unfortunate, but if we take them at their word, which
I don't know. He made it sound like they were completely done today, and then they traded for Samad Taylor. So
GM speak is a very real thing. But if we take them at their word and they're not adding to the bullpen, they're going to do that from within. I would say that probably Lorenzen would be my next choice. And then after that, Michael A. Taylor. That's how I would kind of prioritize them, because those guys still make sense. Whit Merrifield makes a lot less sense today than he did yesterday. But still could work. Still can make it work. But I'd say Lorenzen is probably my top target now.
Yeah, anyone who has like positional flexibility makes sense. So still like Whit Merrifield makes some sense. Tim Anderson, not as much, but someone that can play a little infield and outfield. Yeah, definitely. I think my preference at this point would be Michael A. Taylor or Adam Duvall or Tommy Pham, just one of the outfielders, because I still think that's something that they could use. I wouldn't go as far as to say they need it, but I think that's something that could be useful at the back end of their roster.
I think right now the best way to say it is that the Mariners don't need anything.
Yeah.
But if the right player comes around at the right price, they should be opportunistic about it.
Which is not a place that they've been in really at all going into
last year. They needed to add another player. They needed to, and they didn't.
Now it's like
this year.
it would be cool if they added someone, but I'm fine with the roster as is.
They should be open to it, certainly. But if they don't, we're not going to sit here and be like, oh, they fell short again. Like we're like, no, it's complete enough for opening day. Obviously you got to add in the season, but there's no like
crop up. It's just what it is.
There's no glaring needs. Like you look at and like last year, like, oh, we're gonna roll with Tommy La Stella and Cooper Hummel as the DHs. Ugh. This year, no, that doesn't really exist. Like, we feel pretty good about what everybody's role is right now, and we feel pretty good about the player in every slot in the lineup. So they're in a good spot.
That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen after the Samad Taylor trade. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.